And joining me now is Tony Farrugia, whose father, Barry, was one of the many victims of the Tainted Blood scandal. Tony, thank you so much for joining us on this day. And your two uncles as well, Victor and David, have also died.
That's right, yes. I'm also a cousin who's currently infected with hepatitis C on stage 2. He's still alive, but obviously daily life is a struggle.
And your father, just to take this back to the beginning of this part of your story, had haemophilia, that was how he became infected. So what age were you at that time?
I was 7 years old when my father was first changed from relatively safe treatment cryoprecipitate to factor 8, and he was actually infected with hepatitis B, and we believe exposed to hepatitis C on his first infusion, which was in 1977. So I would have been 6 years old, and then subsequently he was then infected, we believe, in 1981 with HIV. From documents in his medical notes, we believe that they were aware by 1983, but he wasn't told until 1985. He was, however, told in July 84 that he'd contracted non-A, non-B from these products, at which point the relationship in the family took a terrible twist. And I was actually removed from the family home, placed into care, and then my father was sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And my brother was then removed, my twin brother was then removed from the family home 2 days after, and also placed into care. So it's had an absolute catastrophic time. And then obviously with
devastating toll on your family.
Yeah, other members of the family as well. You know, we've lost both uncles now as well, one to HIV, one to Hep C, so we've been burying our dead for 33 years and it's still not over. So we welcome today. You know, we're so pleased it's finally starting.
At such a young age, going back to the time you were telling us about, you can hardly have fully understood what was happening to your family, can you?
We didn't know. We was never told. He was never told of the risks. He was never warned. Even when he was infected and they knew he was infected, he wasn't told.
And were you reunited with your family?
Yeah, in 2010. My father died in 1986, so I was reunited with the family. I think it was 26 years later.
You've done a lot of work to try to raise awareness of this contaminated blood scandal, because for a long time you felt that it simply wasn't getting the attention that it deserved.
When it first broke in the 80s, and obviously we realised that my father was infected, we were told to, after my father had passed away, to go away and forget it ever happened. It was an accident, and that's what we did. I only actually picked this up again a decade ago when I received an email from my dad's sister pointing me to the campaign group Tainted Blood. So I spent a couple of years trawling through their timeline of what we believe has gone on, and yeah, it's horrific, it's shocking.
Will you be giving evidence to the inquiry?
I haven't been called yet, but that's not to say that I won't be, and I would hope that I would be called, because our story is truly shocking, of not so much the infections of my father and the fact that he was sectioned and we never saw him again, but the fact that the after effect of what it did to the family and what it's still doing today.
That effect has, well, it's rippled through the decades, hasn't it? It continues. You say you welcome this inquiry. What do you hope it will achieve? What do you want to see come out of it that will make you say this was a worthwhile exercise?
Well, firstly, my father's death has been recorded falsely in history as an accident, and this wasn't an accident. So we hope that the inquiry will actually get to the bottom of why this happened, who was responsible, what was known. We've not had that before. We've just been completely ignored by the Department of Health on any requests for information, and we welcome this inquiry. This is the way forward.
Thank you so much, Tony, for telling us your story. It's utterly shocking and devastating what happened to your dad, your uncles and cousin, and ultimately to you as the children of this family. But we wish you well, and perhaps we'll talk to you again as the inquiry progresses.
Yes,
thank you very much.
I'd like that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Tony Farrugia, thank you very much.
Well, I'll speak now to Andy Evans, who was given a contaminated blood transfusion by the NHS when he was just 5 years old. Andy, very good of you to join us. This has been a hugely emotional day for everybody.
It certainly has, and it's been a day 30 years in the making, Simon. It's been such a roller coaster ride since the inquiry was announced, and I think today I've been speaking to lots of people here and it's just hit them like a juggernaut. Hearing, as you've just heard Derek speaking there, brings it all home to everybody how absolutely serious this is.
Looking at you now, looking healthy, and yet the prognosis at the time when you were diagnosed was anything but.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I was infected when I was 5 years old with both hepatitis B and C and also HIV. My parents told me when I was 12 that I had HIV, and I was diagnosed as having full-blown AIDS when I was 16. And at that time there were no medications available apart from AZT. Derek mentioned AZT in his testimony this morning. It's a juggernaut treatment is the way that he put it, and it absolutely was, and I have no doubt that for me and for a lot of other people it pushed us over the edge into full-blown AIDS. And as I say, at that time there were no treatments available whatsoever apart from that one drug, and so it was a waiting game to die. And for 4 years I struggled in and out of hospital waiting to die from AIDS.
And Andy, at the time, those of us who were around, there was a stigma around as well, around AIDS. So apart from the physical problems you were dealing with, there was that as well.
Absolutely. It was a time of, the government publicised adverts with the falling gravestones, do not die of ignorance. AIDS was plastered everywhere. It was a dirty disease. It was associated with what were then classed as not nice behaviours. And so people were frightened of AIDS, and people were frightened of people who had AIDS. And so there was no telling anybody. This was something that we had to keep completely to ourselves. I was lucky in that I was quite young, if you can put it that way, when I was infected. And I could talk to my parents about it because they already knew. People who were diagnosed when they were older were warned to keep it away from everybody, including their family and their parents. And they had nobody to talk to about it.
I'll be honest with you, there were several people my age watching some of the testimony this morning, and they were close to tears. I'm just wondering what you hope this will achieve. This could be a 2-year inquiry, but what would you judge a success to be of it?
As I say, this has been coming for a long time now. I've asked a lot of people what they want to come out of the end of this inquiry, what they would like to happen at the end of this scandal. And I think the word closure comes up a lot. I think the word truth comes up a lot, and the word justice comes up a lot. And I think those are the three elements that people are searching for. We need the absolute truth as to what happened before anybody can try to put this behind them. If they've lost loved ones, it's too late. For those of us who are still alive, we need to have that closure before we can actually move on with the rest of our lives. So that's part of it. In other countries, where this scandal has been prevalent, people have gone to prison for their roles in this, but nothing has happened in this country. So I think for us campaigners, people who've been at it for a long time, vindication for having gone on about this for so long is a very important part of it as well.
You have spent by
and
far
of course for the people left behind.
Sorry, Andy. I just want to say you've spent most of your life not expecting to live this long, not expecting to see this day happen, and yet you seem remarkably calm. You must be angry.
I'm angry when I hear the stories of people like Derek this morning. I'm angry when I hear the stories of people that I speak to as chair of a large campaign group. For myself, I think I've come to terms with the fact that this has happened. What I do get angry about is the way that we've been treated over the last 30 years since it's happened. There was a chance for the government to make amends back in the day. They could have held their hands up and said, we made a mistake. But instead, it's been pushed into the long grass, it's been swept under the carpet for 30 years until they were backed into a corner recently and announced this public inquiry. That's what makes me the most angry about all of this.
And very quickly, what's your prognosis now?
I've been fortunate enough to clear the hepatitis C virus on treatment, but it's taken a huge toll on my health. My HIV is stable thanks to modern medications, but all the time new long-term medication side effects are cropping up. You know, we just don't know what's around the corner. Nobody in the world of HIV and AIDS has lived as long as haemophiliacs have with it, and so every day is a new adventure for us, if you want to put it that way.
It's a very brave way of putting it. Andy, it's a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Andy Evans.
Thank you, Simon.
Now, as we were hearing a little earlier, victims of the contaminated blood scandal have been telling a public inquiry how their lives have been ruined. The hearing is looking at how thousands of people were infected with hepatitis C and HIV from contaminated blood they were given in the 1970s and 80s. Many of the victims spoke out about the stigma they faced with their surrounding HIV and the impact that the whole thing has had on their lives. Well, we are joined now by Mark Ward, who was infected with HIV through a blood transfusion in the 1980s and was at the inquiry today. Also, I'm joined by the Director of Policy and Campaigns at the National AIDS Trust, Kat Smithson. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Mark, how did you find out that you had HIV?
It was in a very brutal way. I'd had knee surgery, so I'd been in hospital for about 6 weeks. And it was actually as I was being discharged, my parents were wheeling me through the haemophilia centre when a nurse popped up behind a hatch and shouted across the waiting room, "Mr. and Mrs. Ward, do you want to know Mark's HIV result? He's positive, see you next time, bye."
How old were you?
14.
How did you feel at that moment?
It's hard to say because I knew what was being said because of what I'd seen on the television. But because I was just going home from being away from my family for all that time, it didn't seem real. But the following week, when I went back, we were given more brutal details that you tell nobody because they couldn't guarantee our safety. It was a need-to-know basis and really nobody needed to know. And that's when the fear, they controlled you with fear.
What did they say to you?
Exactly that there was people in America, the haemophiliacs in America who were infected. They were their homes were being attacked, they were being shot at. There was incidents here in the UK where haemophiliacs' homes were daubed with AIDS scum across their front doors. Their family cars were being attacked. So there was a lot of darkness. But they also segregated us. They never let us mix so that we could talk to each other. You went in and you were put in a separate room.
Well, Mark's story, sadly, is of course not the only one. Kat, you're obviously part of this group in terms of trying to do something about it now. It's astonishing it has taken so long to get to the point of a public inquiry only starting now. Why?
Well, I would say from the National AIDS Trust perspective, we're incredibly supportive of this inquiry, and I'm personally and we're professionally in awe of the people who have worked so hard to make this happen and to make their voices heard. It has taken far too long, and there really does need to be an honest reckoning about what went wrong at a systematic level and how we can stop this from ever happening again.
What do you think did happen? I know it's complex and it happened in many different places with many different patients.
I really don't think that I'm in a position to comment on that, and I really think that is the role of the inquiry to work that out, and I think we should appreciate and respect the kind of independence of the inquiry and make sure that that gets to the bottom of it. But I think it's really, really important that we have the opportunity now to hear from people like Mark, to hear their stories, and I think it's important that this inquiry is focusing first and foremost on the evidence from them.
And Mark, I think what was perhaps new in a way for many people who heard some of the evidence today was the stigma that people have had to live with through the years.
Yes.
With this. Is that something that you've experienced?
A great deal. The worst stigma that exists today is, again, still the fear, because there hasn't been an upgrade of information and education. So if you speak to somebody today, the information they're going on is the same as back in the 80s, whereas as medicine has moved on, there are treatments. But I've experienced, I've gone into hospital and they just assume that you get a virus in a particular way, whether it be hepatitis C, whether it be HIV or other things.
So through your own behaviour?
Yes, yes, and with the healthcare, you should be there and cared for regardless, rather than what anybody believes they think.
And what about your friends and your family members? I mean, have they suffered? Have you suffered sort of socially as well?
Oh, greatly. I mean, I was 50 last week and I was told I wouldn't live to see 16. So how do you plan a future? How do your family plan anything looking forward when you're not even going to live to tomorrow, maybe?
And Kat, what would you hope can come out of this, and how quickly, realistically, do you think such an inquiry can move? Because obviously time is of the essence for some people.
Absolutely. I think it's really important that the conclusions that come out of it are sound and that people feel confident in them. So there are estimates that the inquiry could take a few years, and our main concern is to make sure that it is thorough and that it does what people need it to do and tells the truth. And I think that ultimately what we can hope for, and what I think is really admirable about some of the people that have spoken today in the first day of the inquiry, is that they really hope that this can be a springboard to address some of the stigma that's still faced by people living with HIV today.
Mark, just briefly, if I can ask you, what is the one thing, or what is the key things that you would like to come out of this inquiry? Is it an apology? Is it compensation? Is it answers? What is it?
It's the truth. And we need more people to come forward now to give their statements to the inquiry, because every voice, it matters. It really does, and it's vital.
I know you're hoping for a date to speak. Mark Ward and Kat Smithson, thanks both very much.
Thank you.